Welcome back to the program. Earlier in the day, we heard from the Prime Minister, who warned that the Victorian lockdown will see a further hit to the national economy of up to $12 billion. My colleague Andrew Clennell spoke to the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Suker.
Yeah, it is really sobering. I think everybody knew, Andrew, that going into stage 4 lockdowns, as was determined by the state government here, was going to have a significant economic impact. Obviously, the PM has also outlined that it's going to have a real cost of up to $10 billion, $6 to $7 billion of that right here in Victoria, and the remainder that affects confidence and supply chains throughout the country. But you're right, the particularly sobering statistic there is the increase in people who are unemployed, and it's a really heartbreaking time for Victorians.
Are you concerned about any forms of businesses that have been locked down? Do you think the Victorian government's got it right, or as has kind of been flagged by the PM, there are some businesses like distribution centres, maybe construction, that could have been allowed to remain open while the state's locked down or the city's locked down?
Well, Andrew, look, I'm not a commentator. There's still a lot of elements to the lockdown that is not entirely clear to me, I'll be perfectly honest, and there seems to be a lot of confusion in the business community as well as to the extent to which they are able to continue operating. So ultimately, the decision to move into stage 4 lockdown, the intricate decisions on what can remain operational to a degree and what has to completely close are wholly decisions of the state government. So I'm not going to commentate on those. I think they are a sad consequence of where we find ourselves here in Victoria. 7 out of 8 states in Australia have effectively no coronavirus. Victoria is sadly an outlier there, and the devastating consequences of the hotel quarantine debacle, I think, are now being felt by all Victorians, and particularly those businesses and employees who are either closing or losing their jobs. But confusion to some degree reigns, and I'm sure the state government is working very hard to try and clarify that for businesses.
What feedback do you get from people in your electorate about the performance of Daniel Andrews' government on hotel quarantine and the performance of the state government on the crisis in general?
Well, Andrew, you get a cross-section of feedback. I think the feedback at the moment is obviously deep regret and disappointment that Victoria finds itself in this extraordinarily tough position. As I said, I think most Victorians understand that it's not just bad luck that has led to Victoria being the only state in Australia to be in this position. Clearly, the hotel quarantine catastrophe has led us to this point, and they're pretty keen to obviously get answers on that. But they're also very keen to do their part to make sure, as Victorians, they're doing everything possible that they can to help us get out of this as quickly as possible.
Well, you've mentioned the quarantine debacle a couple of times. Are you personally angry about that, and have you found it hard to get your head around how that's occurred?
Well, Andrew, look, my anger or otherwise is largely irrelevant here. I think we've got to deal in facts, and again, the statistics speak for themselves. When you've got Victoria that has overwhelmingly nearly every single coronavirus case in this country, and you accept that it can't just be bad luck that Victoria is the only state that's in this position, I think naturally you ask the question is what have been the failures, what have been the local decision-making issues that have led us to this position. I'm frustrated. My heart breaks for people that I have calling my office on a daily basis, explaining to me that businesses they've spent decades building up are now probably gone. They worked hard to push through and survive that first period of lockdown, and this will do them.
Well, you talk about the effect on businesses and jobs and on ordinary people affected by that. The federal government's been pretty insistent that the JobKeeper's national, whatever solutions are brought into place because of the Victorian situation, will be done on a national basis and apply everywhere. Does that really make sense? I mean, it's quite clear that Western Australia and South Australia, for example, are in a different place to Victoria, far different place. Shouldn't there be extra supports in place for Victorians?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, yes, there are extra supports in place. Obviously, the Prime Minister's announced a disaster payment for people who have to self-isolate here in Victoria and they don't have access to other forms of income, and we're able to do that as part of the state government here declaring a state of disaster. But secondly, on our broader programs, yes, they operate nationally and they operate uniformly, Andrew, but at the end of the day, the criteria is determined by need, and as you saw in the economic update outlined by the Treasurer and Finance Minister, Treasury estimates are that more than half of JobKeeper applicants moving forward after September will be here in Victoria. So that just shows that Victoria, which is a quarter of the country, is going to actually end up, in our estimation, being more than half of the JobKeeper program. It shows that you design national programs, you set the criteria, and the places of relatively higher need will access that program more, and the places with relatively lower need will access it less. I think that's how all good policy is put in place. So the JobKeeper program, I think, is going to end up supporting, sadly, from my perspective, it's going to end up supporting more Victorians because we're going to be in a tougher economic position because of these stage 4 restrictions, sadly, as a result of the hotel quarantine issues.
But you could have a situation...
That national profile, I think, is important.
But you could have a situation where you've got a law firm in WA, 30% down on business, getting the same support as a Victorian business, 90% down on business. Surely there's room for some adjustment here because it's just chalk and cheese between Victoria and the other states.
Well, I mean, Andrew, those sorts of comparisons apply with any program. I mean, people, or any program, regardless of the criteria, you'll have some people who apply and who are eligible because they just meet the criteria, and others who are well and truly in the criteria. So, I mean, I don't think that's a reason that supports your argument. I mean, the point is, clearly, we've got a program, the biggest program ever put in place by federal government of its kind, that's going to end up supporting, in a global basis, more Victorians than any other state or territory. That makes sense because Victoria is now in a worse economic position because of the issues we find ourselves in. I think that demonstrates quite clearly, Andrew, that the program, the JobKeeper program, and indeed any program that's a demand-driven one of this kind, is absolutely designed the way it should and absolutely operating the way it should. So I think the numbers support the contention that you have a national policy and it will end up helping the areas that need it more, and the areas that are doing better will draw on it less. All
right, well, let me ask about HomeBuilder. Now, there was evidence before the COVID Parliamentary Committee last week that just 124 grant applications have been received so far in Tasmania and South Australia. What's been the hold-up in getting these $25,000 grants out the door? Are you surprised or not content with the fact that more money's not out there, more stimulus isn't out there so far?
Well, no. I mean, you don't. In a program like this, it's wrong to look at those sorts of statistics because the payments are paid on milestones. So, depending on the state or territory, it's paid when the first payments are made in relation to the new build, or in some states and territories, it's paid when you're on the title or when you finish the project. So, you need to. I think we will need to look at the actual applications and payments as the year progresses, because you don't build a house in a matter of weeks. These sorts of payments get paid on milestones. What we have seen, and these aren't my statistics, these are from the Housing Industry Association and the Master Builders Association, was in the first month after HomeBuilder was announced, a 77% increase in new home sales. And all that means, Andrew, is more tradies on building sites, more manufacturing of building supplies, whether that be the timber mill workers who make the frames and trusses, or the manufacturing workers who make the bricks and the tiles and the glass. a 77% increase. We're expecting that to continue to grow. The statistics for the next month will be out, but this program applies from the 4th of June. And the reason why it's driven so much more in extra sales, put aside application processes, if you qualify, you will get a grant. So if you've signed a contract to buy a new home after the 4th of June and you qualify, you will get the grant, irrespective of when the state and territory processes the application.
Okay, well, is it
and
true?
As a purchaser, but as a purchaser, Andrew, you're only concerned about getting that payment when you're entitled to it, which is often after you've commenced work, or in some states and territories when you've actually finished the bill.
Is it true New South Wales and Victoria haven't even signed up yet?
No. New South Wales and Victoria have signed up, and they'll be very shortly launching their portals, which will be taking the applications. But again, this grant is not dependent on the application. The application formalises your entitlement to the grant. The grant you receive is determined by the policy we announced on the 4th of June. Victoria and New South Wales, I don't want to steal their thunder, but within a matter of days will launch their portals. Every other state and territory has already got their application processes going, but the grant doesn't depend of itself on the application process. The application just formalises your entitlement to the funding. It
seems inevitable now you'll extend it past December 31. I mean, especially given the situation in Victoria. Do you think it's fair we'll see that in the budget?
Well, I wouldn't agree with you there, Andrew. I mean, yes, this has been a great program, and it's been applauded by the industry, and it's keeping hundreds of thousands of people in jobs. And obviously, the more successful a program is, the more people request that it be extended, and there's no doubt a lot of the industry have requested to me that it be extended on the basis that it's been so effective for them. But we'll wait and see, what it's doing, and we've got to be careful with all these policies that they achieve our objectives, and the objective of this program was to keep hundreds of thousands of people in a job in the second half of this year, when the full impacts of COVID-19 were hitting the housing market. So we'll keep an eye on it. I think we maintain full flexibility as we do with all of our programs, but I don't think it's fair to characterise it as this will certainly or definitely be extended. But there's no doubt that the scheme's been so successful that there's a lot of advocacy coming to the government asking for us to extend it, because it has been so good for the industry.
And the first home owner loan deposit scheme, a lot of speculation about that being extended?
Yeah, there has been. I mean, I think there's been speculation about that from the start. Again, we'll see how that's going. I think clearly there's been a resurgence in new home buyers. There's obviously been a resurgence in new home buyers, first home buyers purchasing new homes with the help of HomeBuilder. Again, we'll just maintain full flexibility, keep an eye on the program. It has been a great success. And again, for that reason, yes, a lot of people are asking for the first home loan deposit scheme to be expanded. But we'll make these judgments in a calm and sober way, and need to take into account a full suite of factors with respect to the housing market.
Finally, Mr Suker, I want to ask, as you sit there in Victoria with lockdown on, hearing from these distressed businesses, constituents, what's your biggest fear from here on in?
Look, my biggest fear, obviously, is that that the permanent damage that is done to businesses, to people's livelihoods, to children's education. I mean, there are sadly going to be children here in Victoria, and I've had one parent say to me that effectively they feel like their children have lost years of education in a conventional sense. So I fear about the long-lasting impacts of these things, and that's why the Morrison government's throwing the absolute kitchen sink at trying to help Victoria get itself out of the problems that have been created by the hotel quarantine failures. The sooner we're able to help Victoria out of that, the less likely that permanent damage will be there. So, I'm doing everything we possibly can, but that fear of the permanent damage, I think, is the fear being felt by so many Victorians, and indeed Australians who I know are really cheering us on and hoping that, that we can get on top of this.
The WA Treasurer